Washington finishes off the regular season at 12-0. Unbelievable game.
You are Locked On Huskies, your daily podcast on the Washington Huskies, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome back to yet another live edition of Locked On Huskies. I'm Rome Tomashoff. That's Lars Hanson. Thank you for making this whatever watch or listen of the day this is for you, because it's definitely not the first as we hit record at 7:48 p.m. Pacific time. So it's been a long day, but first, this episode is brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. Now, Lars, we are just getting back from, I feel like I should talk about whatever it is that, we're going to be discussing on the show. Hopefully people are aware, but Washington just capped off a 12-0 regular season by winning the Apple Cup against the Washington State Cougars by a final score of 24-21. What is your immediate takeaway from this game?
I mean, first of all, I know people on the show are not going to like this, but first of all, tip of the cap to Wazoo. I mean, I think I had the score prediction, 52-20, whatever, and ironically enough, Oregon State showed the effort that Washington State showed the effort that Oregon State should have showed last night, but they knew Jonathan Smith was leaving. Those guys are always going to pay for Jake Dickert. So the fact that, again, UW is certainly susceptible defensively. Cam Ward was fantastic, picked him apart just like Caleb Williams did. But when they need, and again, it's a tried and true saying of this team, when they needed to make a play and their backs were against the wall, they got a couple of key stops that killed Wazoo's drives, even though the offense didn't do anything with it. The McKellistein interception being one of them, and a number of other sacks that resulted in the punt, and UW didn't do anything on offense. But when they needed to at the very last, I mean, Kalen DeBoer and Ryan Grubb, for as many bullets as they've taken for some of the offensive play calling, that 4th and 1 call, if you beat Oregon, that got you a playoff berth. That call on 4th and 1, backed up in your own territory with under, because here's the thing, if you don't get that, it's over.
Yep.
Barring a bad snap and Wazoo not knowing how to clock manage, which I know is not the case, that's a loss. And
yeah,
it's almost indicative, and I know it's kind of cliche to say it, right? But this team they keep finding different ways to win. Yes, you can say they got the benefit of the doubt and, on certain times throughout the season, but this is the mark of a championship team. When you win all these close games, you keep going close games, but yeah, you're winning them. Last year, you lost 2 of them. So it's a matter of, it doesn't have to be the prettiest game. We would certainly like it if there was a prettier game. But the fact is, Wazoo made some great plays, kept it close, and Rome Odunze and Grady Gross got it done when it mattered. I mean, and even Grady Gross, I told you in the press box, missed 3 straight field goal attempts after that first miss. And yet still at the end of the game, and I don't know, did he have more than... I realized I grabbed the wrong sheet. More
because he had the beauty of the live podcast.
He had the missed attempt in the first half, but I'm saying,
and then he
so
outside of the PATs,
1 and 2, right?
Yeah,
right. So he's 1 and 2, right? So that game winner ended a streak of 3 consecutive misses. Again, one was blocked against Utah, but again, still a miss, right? It doesn't matter how you quantify it; it's still a miss.
And one of the things that we have to talk about, of course, is what an awesome moment that is, because we got to talk to Grady after the game, and Jeff Bechtold, the Washington Sports Information Director, as Grady was coming into the room, he said, "Hey, make sure you guys ask Grady about what just happened in the locker room," or what Kalen DeBoer said to him in the locker room. And then after all that, to find out that he'd been put on scholarship, that's just such a cool moment, and what a way to just cap off what has truly been such an incredible season. And something that we kind of, because there is a lot to talk about, right? Where Pac-12 championship game against Oregon now, where that's going to be tough. We knew it was going to be tough anyways, but just from the way that the team played today, it's going to be a dogfight no matter what. And just to kind of have a moment like that where you don't need to worry about what's happening next, the 6 days that are going to be between now and that game. But just kind of take that in. What a fantastic moment for that kid, man. That's just such a cool thing to see.
No doubt. And I mean, I think that's kind of the crazy thing when I mentioned that he missed 3 in a row. He had only missed 1 the entire season prior. Now, again, wasn't
Right.
like they were asking him to boot it from 50, 60. But the other part that I mentioned to you throughout the season, he's been kicking a lot of kickoffs through the end zone. So it's not just that he's been making his field goal kicks when he's been called upon, but he's been making sure opposing offenses don't have massive returns. And that had kind of been a struggle of the team over the course of a few years, just where if you're having the same kickoff kicker and place kicker do the same thing, well, his leg's going to get tired eventually. And I actually don't think that's the case with Grady. I think, he missed the first one. It was staying right. It stayed right. He almost snuck in the back end, but I wonder if that kick starts in the middle of the field, versus on the right hash. If he makes that one, and again, I'm not making excuses for him. He's got to make that kick. But it didn't end up costing him. And so I think it's kind of a cool moment for Grady to like, hey, look, nobody's perfect, right? Except the team. Team's 12-0. But, everybody can have a couple of mistakes, have a few bad things, and it doesn't cost you your season.
No, absolutely. And that's one of the biggest things here. But I feel like the biggest thing we really do need to talk about is that 4th and 1 play call, where backed up on your own 29-yard line with a minute 15 to go in the game, and you run because Michael Penix and Kalen DeBoer both told us after the game that it was an option, that he did have the option to hand it to Dylan Johnson, but to make such a great read right there to make sure the ball gets to the right spot, and then Rome Odunze, who just all season long has been so reliable, to pick up 23 yards there on 4th and 1 and really just set everything up. Because like you said, Lars, if you don't pick it up right there, the season is over. Like, yeah, the Pac-12 championship game, there's still a lot on the line there, but barring a whole lot of other circumstances, we probably aren't talking about the college football playoff in the same way that we are right now, where it's just win and that's it. Where if Wazoo kicks a field goal there, it's win. It's not only a win, but you need some help too. And I do want to get to one of these comments here because we're going to have to jump to an ad read real fast too. But I want to get to this one from Jeremy Evans, who says, can we stop with the survive stuff? They won, plain and simple. While that's absolutely true, sometimes, hey, it takes a little bit more than just winning to get there. And this team is so resilient that I feel like sometimes survives is a good word to use for this team. But we're going to talk about that on the other side of the break. I can tell Lars has a lot of thoughts about this. But first, we're going to take a quick moment to shout out our friends over at eBay Motors. Passion, drive, and patience. What brings home the winning trophy is also what keeps your ride or die alive. eBay Motors is everything you need to maintain your vehicle and level it up to peak performance. From superchargers, roof racks, exhaust kits, LED headlights, and more. Whether you're into speed, power, or style, eBay Motors has got you covered. With over 122 million parts for your number one ride or die, you'll always find exactly what you're looking for. And with eBay Guaranteed Fit, your part is guaranteed to fit your ride every time or your money back. Because with eBay Motors, you're burning rubber, not cash. With all the parts you need at the prices you want, it's easy to turn your car into the MVP and bring home that win. Keep your ride or die alive at ebaymotors.com. Eligible items only. Exclusions apply. eBay Guaranteed Fit is only available to U.S. customers. All right, Lars, because for anybody who's just checking in with us right now here on Locked On Huskies, Washington, do you think it's fair to use the term survived when talk about this team in terms of what they did today?
My response to that would be, what word is more appropriate? I mean, you were tied multiple times, right? 2 or 3 times at least, right? You had the lead, lost it, tied, had the lead, tied, had the lead, tied. You never trailed, right? So that's why the word is not escape, right? Because if you escape, you come back, you do all those sort of things. But to say that Washington did anything more than survive, here's the thing. Here's my definition of survive when it comes to college football. If you need a game-winning kick on the final drive, you survived. They didn't survive against Michigan State. They didn't survive against Cal because they blew those teams out. They didn't, they survived against Oregon because it was a competitive survival, right? Hey, you won the game. Sure. It's close, whatever. And even that one, you were actually trailing in the game. I would still say survive for that one, right? Much like Oregon State or Oregon, or they survived Oregon State, right? That's another one, right? I think I understand why fans say, "Oh, hey, we won plain and simple." Well, here's the problem with that. Not in the eyes of the College Football Playoff Committee, not in the eyes of a lot of people that I heard from and also heard on the radio driving back from the game, where the national perception of this game is you needed a late field goal on the final drive to beat a 5-7 Washington State team at home.
So, in that same vein, I do have a question for you, because we heard something very similar a couple of weeks ago from the head of the College Football Playoff Committee when he said, "Oh, you can't count out Miami and Florida State in that rivalry," when he was defending keeping Florida State ahead of Washington. So are we going to hear that, or is the script going to flip all of a sudden? Because I think both of those things are very possible.
Well, I think it's almost like they're both fair assessments, right? I mean, I think if you want to give credit to Florida State and Miami, then you have to give the same credit to Washington State. Granted, I don't know off the top of my head where that FSU Miami game was played, so I don't know who was the home team. So, if Miami's the home team, right? Right. So if it's at Miami, it's a little different than if this game is in Pullman and it's the same result. Okay. You can make that case. It's a rivalry game. Wazoo was motivated. The fact of the matter is, and I wrote this on Inside the Huskies after the game, Washington does not have a true semblance of a run game. Rome Odunze, his 23-yarder on that last drive was the longest run of any combined rushing attempt for Washington against Washington State. Dylan Johnson's game long was 9. Tybo Rogers' game long was 20. I'm not great at math, but that's a 3-yard difference. So the fact that it took, now again, it's not bad, right?
I don't think it was 20. It was a 13-yarder for Tybo. I think he finished the game with 20.
No,
you said
20. Tybo, no. Combined. 9 for Dylan.
Yeah.
No, but where the 20 came from was Dylan's long one was 9 yards. Tybo's long run was 11. You put the two together. The two combined were still not longer than
I see where you're going with this.
one.
Okay.
Right.
I see what you're saying.
But so it's not necessarily negating, hey, I mean, Rome's a big player, but he's also not necessarily the guy you would expect to run. He would, right? But I mean, as a true running threat, right? I think of yards after catch and big catches for him, not necessarily. It would be like if Dylan Johnson had a 75-yard touchdown catch. Right. And, Rome had like a 40-yarder. It's like, okay, well, I would expect those two to be flipped. So, I mean, it's a matter of this team plays together when they really need to. But against Oregon, like we said in the opening segment, they got 2 backs at least with Bucky Irving and Jordan James. I don't know if Washington has a second running back. They have 4, which means you have none.
So that's definitely a concern, because you and I have talked about Tybo Rogers on this program off air and things we've written on Inside the Huskies, but he's still a true freshman. And while he's very talented and we're very excited about his future, it's not necessarily there just yet. And I think Dylan Johnson he's going to have some time to get healthier now, because from the way Ryan Grubb described his injury, if somebody stepped on his foot towards the end of the Oregon State game, which is how he talked about it, and it's just kind of a swelling issue. That's more of a pain management kind of thing. And you could see at points where it didn't look like it was bothering him, and then other points where it looked like it did. That's one of the hard things where we've talked about a lot about when Cameron Davis just went out for the season with just a week to go before the season actually started. How big is that injury looming right now, where having both of those guys, not just in terms of what they can do running the ball, but in terms of what they can do as pass catchers too?
Oh, no doubt. No, I mean, the loss of Cam Davis is more and more highlighted by every single game they played this season. But I think it's a valid point. But because the injury happened in fall camp, before you played your first game, right? I mean, granted, it happened towards, I believe, the second or third week of fall camp, right? Like, it wasn't like week 1, first 2-3 days of practice, he goes out. But even if that's the case, you still have played an entire season up to this point, and Will Nixon also played last season. So the fact that there's not more coming from that group, and you would think somebody would want to take that torch that Cam Davis opened up, right? I mean, look at last season with Wayne Jalapapa and Cam Davis. They were the perfect 1-2 combination. It's basically been Dylan, Dylan, maybe Tybo. I mean, I told you after the game that I wrote on the Huskies, Will Nixon got 1 carry for -4 yards. And Kalen DeBoer mentioned after the game, when I asked him about it, he's like, well, we need to negate the negative plays. And I'm like, well, you're right, but also getting 1 and 2 yards necessarily when you're not, at 3rd and 1, right? But even still, Oregon, when you go back to their final drive, I think it was like 2nd and 2 or 3rd and 2 when they were still in Oregon territory. They needed, I think, a couple of yards on 3rd down, and Bucky Irving or Jordan James ran off for like 9 or 10 yards. So it's like there's nothing stopping you from saying, hey, we could get more than a couple of yards here. I mean, again, Rome Odunze highlighted the performance right there. Like, you get 23 when you need 1. The problem is it's not consistently reliable that you're going to get that. I mean, it took them 5 tries before Dylan Johnson punched in his first touchdown after they got inside the 10. Like, that to me is alarming. Like, it's great that they've had this incredible season, but when you're going to go against Oregon and then potentially against one of Michigan, Georgia, Bama, Texas, Florida State, whoever you want to pick in that ain't pretty. And that's got to change in a hurry. And Rome Odunze actually, unsurprisingly, said exactly as much. He's like, hey, we got to get that fixed in a hurry.
Right. That's the biggest thing. It's the execution piece moving forward, where you look at some of the drops today from some of the receivers and some of the other things. I think one of the nice things, though, when you kind of look at the other side of it, is one thing that we talked about is while the defense hasn't ever been a top flight elite defense, they've continued to just do enough when asked. They sacked Cam Ward 5 times today. They did a really good job of getting after the quarterback and just putting pressure on him consistently. Shout out to Lance Holtzclaw for getting his first career sack. Braylon Trice just had another phenomenal game. Voit Tanufi got pressure all night long, man. There was one play that I remember pointing out to you where he put a spin move on a guard and Cam Ward was able to escape him. I think he ended up still getting sacked on the play, or there was a holding call or something. But Voit put a spin move on a guard and just kind of shook him out of his shoes. And it's really great to see the pass rush come along, because while there are things that are still lacking, there are other things where it's, oh, this is getting better. This is good to see. This is promising to see going forward, where if they can get pressure on Bo Nix come Friday night, that's going to be huge, where they didn't really get that a whole ton in the game in Seattle. And if the pass rush can do enough to put a little bit more pressure on him, that's a game changer.
Ryan, if you think about it, for all the flack that the coaching staff gets, if you look at the defensive coaching staff, it's not surprising that Inoki Brecherfield's guys at some point will flash and develop, or a couple guys will pop, right? Eric Schmidt's been a rather quality edge coach and certainly gotten a lot out of those guys. And the fact that Lance and Jacob Lane, a bunch of other guys, are able to play as true freshmen and redshirt freshmen, respectively, Jacob Lane being the true freshman in that group, that all these guys, I mean, William Inge with the linebackers, Chuck Morrell with the safeties, Mikel Steen gets a pick today. It's the one group I'm omitting here.
Yeah,
the one position on defense that I'm omitting, where I can't look at the coach and say, yeah, you know what you're doing. Yeah, you'll make the necessary adjustments. I can't say it.
No, you're absolutely right.
To quote Mike Singletary, cannot win with him, cannot play with him, can't do it. Can't do it. You're absolutely right. And because we gotta take a quick break for another ad read here, but we've got a whole lot to talk about on the other side of the break. And I think that we should stay on the defense a little bit more, because the defense was just so clutch again today when they were needed the most. And I think there's a lot to talk about on that side of the ball, especially as we now have to come to this Pac-12 championship preview. But first, we got to shout out our good friends over at Game Time, because if you are going to be in Vegas for this game and you want to buy tickets for it, you should not be stressed out when you're doing that. And Game Time is the fast and easy way to buy tickets for all the sports, music, comedy, and theater events near you, with killer last-minute deals, all in prices, views from your seat, and their best price guarantee. Game Time takes the guesswork out of buying tickets. Some of the best things about them: the flash deals, the zone deals, and it's so easy to see a view from every single seat in the venue, so you know exactly what you're going to be seeing before you buy. The all-in prices also show your total upfront, so you know you're getting a great deal without hidden fees. You can buy tickets in seconds with just 2 taps. Take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDON.
COLLEGE for $20 off. Download Game Time today. Last minute tickets, lowest prices guaranteed. Coming right back here, we said we're going to stick on the defensive side. Is there anything you want to highlight that? Because one person that I know you and I talked about a lot up in the press box today was Carson Bruner, and just the energy and just the extra attitude that he's brought to that defense. And do you think that he's going to? I'll pose it to you this way, because I feel like this part is a bit of an obvious question, but do you think that Carson Bruner gets the start over Alfonso Tuputala in the Pac-12 championship game against Oregon?
I mean, it's tough because, well, first of all, aside from my score prediction, I think everything was right. But
you just had to flex that one, didn't you? All your bold predictions.
Right. Well, I was gonna say, aside from the one, which I probably should stop doing. The thing to your point, Carson leads the team in both solo tackles and assisted tackles, so 14 total tackles in the game. And he, to your point, was a disruptive force. But the fact that Alfonso also had a sack for -9 yards, ironically, it looks like that was his only solo tackle of the game. So I think, yeah, to your point, I think Alfonso should certainly still be involved, right? I don't think he needs to be like permanently relegated to the bench and things like that. But I think it's fair to say at this point, Carson Bruner's the better linebacker of the two. And I don't really think that's a stretch to say at this point, because if you go back and look at the Oregon State game, look at that's what makes him so good on special teams. When he's always that gunner, that missile that always ends up making a highlight play on special teams, because he's instinctually knowing where to go, how to cut through traffic. When he made the stop against Oregon State, he went right up the middle past the lineman who wasn't able to get over quick enough. And today he was all over the field. So I think, and it's also not surprising, right? It's kind of like with a good linebackers coach in William Inch, who knows how to develop linebackers, played the position, all that. It's not necessarily surprising that with more opportunities, Carson's having more success. I think it's a matter of the coaches are already rotating enough at that position. I think it's more like a formality if he gets to start, right? Because I would still imagine Alfonso plays a decent amount of snaps, but maybe there's a 5 to 10 degree snap difference between the two of those against Oregon in the Pac-12 championship game.
No, absolutely. I agree with you there. And because that was the big point that I want to make sure we hit on, because he really has brought just an extra attitude to this defense. It's been really cool to see. Cameron Michelle asked a good question here. And again, for everybody who's watching our live stream, please feel free to drop comments here as we kind of finish up. We want to make sure we interact with you guys as much as possible. So I'll try to get to a couple of your questions here. She says, any concerns with Penix's accuracy? Does he seem off? And it did seem like he had a lot of high throws like early on in the game and didn't ever really seem to settle in. And that was something that I feel like can be corrected really easily, but it almost felt like the internal clock that he has, where some of these timing routes was just a little bit off. And that's something with a day or two of practice and just running some extra routes that feels like something that can be corrected rather easily.
How much of that you think is on the offensive line, especially getting pressure up the middle?
And I would definitely say that's a big portion of it. It didn't seem like he was pressured as much as he has been in previous weeks today. But there were some concerns about that, especially near the end of the game, in my opinion.
Right, and I think that's more the thing when Wazoo started to gain momentums, and I don't know what that means. But speaking of drops, I think that's the other part too, was where Penix.
That's just YouTube stuff.
But the other thing too, it's the fact that when Penix. Here's the thing, and I told you this, earlier in the season, where I would rather have Penix miss woefully and have it not catchable, like where he missed Jalen McMillan by about 7 yards going to the sideline late in the fourth quarter. Some of those, okay, I'd rather have you do that than do what Penix has done at times this season, which is throw into triple coverage over the dead center of the field and somehow it doesn't get picked off. But he hasn't had a ton of those bad decisions, but it does feel like, to Michelle's point, that he is a little bit off. And Mike's a great guy. Look, he's been through a lot. This is an incredibly taxing season on him. And I'm not trying to, give him his flowers that are not unjust. But I think it's almost kind of started to wear on him a little bit this season. And I don't mean that badly, right? Because he's still able to perform and they're still able to win. But I think post-game might have been a kind of the clearest indicator of that, where he's pretty blunt, pretty short, pretty concise, not going to say a ton, because he knows what's wrong, and I don't know if it can get fixed. I think that's kind of where he's upset. And I'm not saying he's upset, right? But that's kind of my read from it, right? Where I look at him and I think, well, he wasn't feeling this way with the offensive line last year. I think there's a little bit of a problem up front with the community. And it's not Parker Brailsford, it's not Roger Rosengarten, and it's not Troy Fatano. Those three are safe. Everybody else, I don't know.
So I think that one of the biggest things that we should point out here that's really been tough to watch, and I know we commented on it a little bit earlier, but the drops from some of the receivers have been really, really tough too. Like Jalen Polk has struggled over the last couple of weeks, and that's been really hard to see because he had some really strong hands, like especially early on in the season, really up through last week against Oregon State, and now he's gone 2 straight games without a catch. And it felt like there were times where Ryan Grubb turned to Jeremy Bernard over him, whether that's his call or Jamarcus Shepard's call. And that was something that I think that this week especially, you can't have that. And there needs to be a way where whatever needs to happen to make sure that gets right, because Jalen Polk has been such a reliable security blanket for Michael Penix in so many big moments this season that I think that would go a long way towards alleviating some of this pressure that he might be feeling, where it's okay, just get him a couple catches, get him in rhythm like they did with Jalen McMillan early on in this game today. If you can do that early on against Oregon for Jalen Polk, then I think that this offense might be back to cooking where they were early on.
Right, but I mean, as I'm looking at the total yards, to your point, Rome Odunze 7 catches, 12 targets, Jalen McMillan 5 catches, 7 targets. So that's respectable because again, those aren't drops per se. One maybe was a drop, but a lot of those were more just misses. Right? Here's the problem:
Right.
4 targets, 0 catches, 0 yards for Jalen Polk. I love the kid. We both love the kid. He's a great kid, not a big talker, ironically, because when he opened his mouth before the pregame at Oregon State, I don't know what happened, but something happened between kickoff of Oregon State and his first target because, well, the reason why Giles Jackson didn't play, to answer the commenter's question, is because they're trying to preserve his red shirt. That's a separate conversation, but that's why he wasn't suited today. So that's why Giles was never going to play against Washington State today. I think that
it does feel like there's going to be a full, a full arsenal of receivers against Oregon, which will be very helpful because we saw Giles play really well in that game, catch a touchdown. And he's another dude who's been really, really reliable just with his hands throughout the season whenever he's been on the field.
Yeah, and I mean, I think honestly he might take Jalen Polk's spot just because somebody's got to catch the ball reliably in this offense. And right now you had one, Rome Odunze. Jalen McMillan's kind of starting to come back to being that guy, especially after today, but only having 26 yards. Right? That doesn't.
Right. Jalen McMillan had 26 yards today. Yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Well, it's weird because the yak is 40. So I don't know where we're getting that number, but that's beside the point. But the point is you got 120 for Rome and then 26, 25, 15, and 12 for one of the best passing offenses in the country. That's unacceptable. And Bo Nix, people can call him the check down king all they want. It works. The ball's out quickly. They get the guys in space and they're able to actually catch the ball and move, which really wasn't a question for Washington until like 3 or 4 weeks ago, and really even only 2 or 3 weeks ago, for being honest.
Yeah, and it's interesting to see how things have changed with Ryan Grubb's scheme, where all of a sudden they've just wanted to push the ball down the field way more often, and that's something where it's almost confusing at times, where it's like, okay, you have all these playmakers that are really great with the ball in space. We saw that early on in the season. There were so many just like quick screens, bubble screens to McMillan, to Jeremy Bernard, to whoever else, where they were allowed to do that, where they were allowed to make plays in space. And that almost seems to have been abandoned outside of they run it at least once a game, the tunnel screen, where the offensive line will come out a little bit and then somebody will cut underneath and go afield. That play has worked really, really well for the most part this season. But outside of that, there haven't been nearly as many just quick screens on the outside where guys are just getting into space. And that's something that we might see more of it, but I'd like to see more of that, just kind of, especially as, we get down to the Pac-12 championship game here.
You know what I want to see more of, to pick up that point? The irony, the straight up Ryan Grubb irony of Rome Odunze having the biggest run of the game on the final play and Dylan Johnson getting a pass catch to set up the game-winning field goal. Like,
Just
where has that been the last 11 weeks? Mainly, I'm talking about the Dylan Johnson catch out of the backfield. I'm not expecting Rome Odunze to break one for 20 plus on multiple games. I mean, he can. He certainly has the talent to. But it just seems like, to your point, they've been forcing it downfield so much more that I understand why, right? When you got the left arm of Penix, it's worth a shot. But this isn't 2022, it's 23. And that hasn't been as effective this season consistently, drive after drive, that it was last year. Where, I mean, the amount of drives that last year you could say they went 3 and out and Penix missed on every single one, probably could count them on both of your hands. This year I could count multiple games when that's happened, and multiple times in multiple games, including today, right? You know, where I told you, I think it was second or third quarter, where they go 3 and out, 3 passes, nobody runs the ball. It's like, well, why?
yeah, that's the biggest question.
Like, that's the problem.
And if that has something to do with maybe a healthy Dylan Johnson, we'll see. That's something we're going to talk about more over the coming week. I know we kind of got to get out of here soon, but that's something we'll talk about more over the coming weeks. And because it's a point I remember making, and just to kind of wrap this all up with what you're talking about, in the biggest games, Dylan Johnson is averaging 23 carries a game. Like, he's carrying the ball a lot when he's needed. And we'll probably see that this week against Oregon, but we know that there's a whole lot that needs to get right before them. But in the meantime, you got to celebrate 12-0, because it's still a fantastic accomplishment that you need to make sure that it's talked about, and it's just you give it its flowers, because that doesn't happen very often. And especially, somebody made the comment on YouTube earlier on that going from 0-12 to 12-0 in the time frame that they did, that's still just an incredible feat. And Kalen DeBoer has done so much good for this program. Lars, as always, thank you so much for being here. Thank you to all the everydayers in the comments, because this has been a fantastic stream, and this has been a great season so far, and we love that we get to share it all with you. It's really awesome. It means the world to us. And if you're new to the channel, there's so many ways to get involved. If you like what we had for you here today, just make sure you subscribe wherever you get your podcast, whether that's YouTube, Spotify, Apple Music, Amazon Music. We are there. We are everywhere. Please stick with us. We're going to be going at this all week. We're going to get our buddy Spencer McLaughlin back on here at some point, because when, Washington plays Oregon, we're going to have a crossover about that. Stay tuned until then. Please make sure you subscribe. Leave us a 5-star review for your audio only. Make sure you slap a like on the video, and make sure you come back every single day when we have more for you. Thank you so much for listening, and we will talk to you on Monday.